Week 5 of the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. And today the White House says the 4 to 6 week timeline remains the objective. Meanwhile, thousands of Southern California troops are being deployed to the Middle East. The president has threatened to attack Iran's energy and water supply systems if a peace deal isn't reached soon.
There's two tracks here. The president has always said that diplomacy is his #1 option and priority. So if there's ever a chance for a deal, again, the president is open to listening, but it does not deter him from focusing on the military objectives that he set out 30 days ago and that our military is continuing to achieve day by day.
In response, the Iranian regime says Trump's expectations for surrender are unrealistic.
With more on the war in Iran, we're joined once again by retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer. Hal, good to see you. You just heard White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt suggesting the war is going, quote, according to plan, and that the 4 to 6 week timeline the president initially laid out remains. A month into Operation Epic Fury, what is your sense of where things stand? Do you see an end in sight?
Well, Michael, what I've seen a lot of progress made in terms of targeting. They've hit a number of certainly ballistic missile targets. The ballistic missile threat has dropped tremendously. The drone threats dropped tremendously. Their Air Force has been basically wiped out, as their Navy. Although the Revolutionary Guard Corps small boat, midget submarine, their sea mine capability, still there. And of course, they've basically shut down the Strait of Hormuz for global traffic. So there is a huge problem at this point as far as how to get that open and to pursue the rest of the objectives.
Well, President Trump expressing optimism that a deal will be reached shortly, but also suggesting if a deal is not reached and the Strait of Hormuz not immediately open for business, then the U.S. will obliterate Iran's energy resources. He made a post about that and other vital infrastructure. Now, what would that act do to Iran and to potentially ending or even exacerbating the conflict?
Well, sure. If we were to hit their power plants and go after their oil infrastructure, of course, Iran would respond by targeting more energy infrastructure with the Arab states, the Gulf states. And of course, the big fear is they might go after those very precious desalination plants. You got to remember, none of these states over there have big fresh river systems or lakes that feed their aquifers. What they have is they desalinate seawater, and so those things are very vulnerable. So the fear is if we go that direction, there could be a response which could be equal or even worse than what we did, to our allies over there. And then the other part too is it permissible under international law? There are very strict rules in the laws of armed conflict as to what you can hit and why you can hit it. And legal scholars are kind of reviewing that and some of the language around it right now.
Yeah, Hal, there's been no official announcement of a ground invasion, but there's been a lot of speculation on this, reporting suggesting at least 2,500 Marines and sailors aboard the USS Tripoli have entered the region with additional reinforcements deployed as well, including elements of the 82nd Airborne. Why the buildup? What could the purpose of these deployments be? Do you foresee a ground invasion?
Not an invasion per se, but possibly a series of very extensive raids. There's a series of islands in the Strait of Hormuz that are quite vulnerable. They're the way you kind of control the strait. And that's something, those amphibious raids are something that the Marine Expeditionary Unit that's there is that probably they're the best in the world at doing that stuff. There's another unit that's coming in from Southern California right behind it, same type of unit, about 2,200 Marines. They too are trained in this. And then the airborne forces provide the ability to not just parachute troops into islands or to any other objective, but also do what we call air mobile operations, where they can use helicopters to come in and do stuff. In other words, it gives the president a lot of options, and it makes the Iranians look at a lot of different areas that are suddenly vulnerable to attack, not from the air, but from the ground.
Okay, so Secretary of State Marco Rubio, meanwhile, says that, quote, all objectives are being met on or ahead of schedule. We're a month in. What do you make of U.S. objectives in Iran?
Well, I think some of the military objectives obviously are being met. The thing that we're all hoping for was that at some point that what we saw in December and January, that the Iranian people will go out into the streets and they would try to, not just protest, but also seize government buildings and maybe, foster regime change. Well, that really hasn't happened. I think there's still a ways to go. And I think most who have looked at this say, look, we're going to have to caused massive attrition. The Basij militia, that radicalized militia that has been used by the regime, and then of course the Revolutionary Guard Corps before that happens. And so we're starting to hear some language like maybe cutting a deal with, the Speaker of the Parliament, maybe the elected president, who are distinctly different in tone and style than what we're hearing from the Revolutionary Guard Corps. In fact, we may see the growing schism between the more secular side and the more radical side of the government. That's just another way of fomenting regime change.
As you know, the U.S. and Israel went into this campaign together in late February. Bibi Netanyahu says Israel has met half its aims. Do you think the U.S. objectives and Israeli objectives are aligned? And what happens if they're not?
I think they're pretty close. I think there's some things that Israel would like to see happen that the U.S. is not as staunch upon. I'm sure, with the 15 points that President Trump has put out there, I'm sure Bibi Netanyahu would like to add about 3 or 4 more onto that. But we're going to see what we get here. Right now, working very well. I will tell you, at a tactical, operational level, that the Israeli forces and the U.S. forces, particularly the air campaign that's going on, working extremely well together and being able to prosecute these targets very effectively. So that's working well. Strategic objectives, we'll see how the war ends. I don't know if it's going to align completely with what we both set out to do.
All right, we only have 30 seconds left, but a so-called hacktivist group linked to Iranian intelligence services claims that it has stolen personal and confidential information from FBI Director Kash Patel. Now, does that concern you about possible threats here at home and not just cyber attacks?
Absolutely. That concerns me tremendously. Cybersecurity, everyone needs to be leaning forward in this right now, particularly now because the Iranians are very adept at it. Also, the threat of what were sometimes called sleeper cells or sleeper agents, but potential terrorist acts on behalf of Iran here at home. We just saw what happened in Michigan, and that was attributed to Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy. We just have to be leaning forward, and if you see something, say something.
Retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer, good of you to take the time. Always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Cher.
All right, thanks, Hal.